Good evening. My name is Marty West, and I'm on the faculty here at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and I'm thrilled to have the opportunity tonight to welcome Cindy Brown, Howard Fuller, Sonny Ladd, and Patrick Wolf to tonight's Askwith debate. Tonight is the third debate in our new Askwith debate series, which we created both to address specific controversies in the field of education and to model the way in which civil disagreement can promote deeper understanding. This year, we've welcomed more than 3,600 people on campus for the Askwith forums and debates, and we're very pleased to have you with us here this evening, as well as those of you who are with us online. We do have one more Askwith forum this semester. On Tuesday, May 9th, Roger Brooks, the president and CEO of Facing History and Ourselves, and Maureen Costello, the director of Teaching Tolerance at the Southern Poverty Law Center, will join HGSE Professor Stephanie Jones and our dean, James Ryan, for a discussion about how schools are preparing students to work with others from different racial and cultural backgrounds. Tonight, however, our topic is school vouchers, or more precisely, the full range of government policies that aim to expand families' access to private schools. Do such measures work to level the playing field by helping low-income families gain access to better schools? Or do they drain resources from public school systems and leave the most disadvantaged students behind? What are their implications for achievement gaps and for school segregation? And what role, if any, should the federal government play in supporting the expansion of private school choice? These questions are hardly new, but they gain new prominence with Donald Trump's ascendancy to the White House, and in particular with his choice of Betsy DeVos for Education Secretary. President Trump pledged during the campaign to devote $20 billion in new federal education spending to promoting school choice, including among private schools, and Secretary DeVos devoted her career as philanthropist and an advocate primarily to that cause. Of course, their ability to follow through on the president's commitment will depend on the cooperation of Congress, and a major federal initiative seems less likely today than it did a week ago, given that a tax credit to support private school scholarships was not included in the president's skeletal proposal for tax reform. The absence of looming federal action on the issue, however, does not diminish its importance. As in so much of American education, the real action on private school choice has been and remains at the state level. Since 1990, when the nation's first school voucher program was launched in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, we've seen a gradual expansion in the number of states with programs designed to expand access to private schools. Currently, 61 such programs exist nationwide in 31 states and the District of Columbia. Participation in these programs is typically limited to specific groups of students, low-income students, students in a particularly struggling district, students with disabilities, for example. Participation is often subject to strict caps. As a result, the total number of students participating remains small, at about 440,000, or fewer than 1% of K-12 students nationwide. But the trend is clearly upward, and as we hold this event tonight, legislatures in Missouri, in New Hampshire, in Iowa, Texas, Nevada, and elsewhere are actively contemplating the expansion of existing programs or the creation of new ones. In a sense, then, regardless of one's perspective on the issue, the attention that the new administration has brought to private school choice is a welcome development, one that provides an opportunity for us as a nation to debate an issue that's largely been overlooked in the national debate over school reform in recent years. The state programs that already exist also provide a wealth of evidence for us to draw upon as we engage in that debate. Of course, just what that evidence means is contested, as will soon become clear. But it's not as if we're flying completely blind. So our aim tonight as a community is to capitalize on that opportunity by holding a discussion of the issue that's informed both by that evidence and by our panelists' personal experience with the issue as researchers, practitioners, and advocates. And I can't imagine a better group of panelists to help us achieve that goal. The proposition that we've asked them to debate, if we can bring it up on the screen, reads as follows. School vouchers and similar policies that expand access to private schools are a promising strategy to improve outcomes for disadvantaged students in the U.S. So before I introduce our panelists, I want to get you involved in the conversation by asking you to share your views on this same proposition as we head into the debate. You can see the instructions on the screen, but you can either text to the word Askwith to the numbers 22333 and then register your response, or you can log on to the website pollev.com/Askwith. We'll see the responses show up here in real time for a couple minutes. The opponents are faster. Are they more numerous? I expected they might be more numerous as well as faster. All right, looks like we're approaching stability, so we'll call it at 65% opposed to the proposition, just 16% heading into the debate supportive. There is a crowd in the middle, about 1 in 5, who are willing to be swayed either way. However you read the results, it looks like Howard and Pat, you have some work to do. That gives us a baseline, and we'll come back at the end of the evening and see whether they got that work done. Let me introduce the panelists to the stage right now. Actually, let me introduce them first, and then I'll introduce them to the stage. I'll start with Cynthia Brown, more commonly known as Cindy, who is a senior fellow at the left-leaning Center for American Progress. She was previously the vice president for education policy at the Center for American Progress and served as director of its Renewing Our Schools, Securing Our Future National Task Force on Public Education. Prior to working at CAP from 1986 to 2001, Brown served as director of the Resource Center on Educational Equity of the Council of Chief State School Officers. In 1980, she was appointed by President Carter as the nation's first Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights within the U.S. Department of Education. She was there when they turned the lights on. And prior to that, she worked for the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under law, the Children's Defense Fund, and started her career in the Office of Civil Rights of the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare as an investigator. She's on the board of directors of the American Youth Policy Forum and Perry Street Prep Public Charter School. And she received her master's degree in public administration from the Maxwell School at Syracuse and her BA from Oberlin College. Next, Howard Fuller is the Distinguished Professor of Education and Director of the Institute for Transformation of Learning at Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The mission of the Institute is to support exemplary education options that transform learning for children while empowering families, particularly low-income families, to choose the best options for their children. Fuller served as the superintendent of Milwaukee Public Schools from 1991 to 1995 as the nation's first voucher program was getting off the ground, and he became nationally known for his support for fundamental educational reform. A few of his prior positions have included Director of the Milwaukee County Department of Health and Human Services, Dean of General Education at Milwaukee Area Technical College, and Secretary of the Wisconsin Department of Employment Relations. He's the chair of the board of the Black Alliance for Educational Options and the Alliance for Choices in Education in Milwaukee, and he's chair of the Charter School Review Committee for the City of Milwaukee. He's above all a civil rights advocate and the author of No Struggle, No Progress, A Warrior's Life from Black Power to Education Reform. He received his BS in sociology from Carroll College in Wisconsin, an MSA in social administration from Western Reserve University, and his PhD from Marquette University. Next, Helen, or Sunny Ladd, is the Susan B. King Professor of Public Policy Studies and Professor of Economics at Duke University's Sanford School of Public Policy, where I learned that this morning she gave her last exam after 41 years of teaching at Duke, Dartmouth, Wellesley, and Harvard. So I think we offer a little round of applause for that. Actually, she still has to grade the exams when she gets back, but we can applaud her nonetheless. But she's not ending her career as a researcher, which has been a productive one. In addition to the topic of school choice we're discussing tonight, her research is focused on school finance and accountability, teacher labor markets, and early childhood programs. She's been a trailblazer in North Carolina with colleagues at Duke and UNC in assembling the incredible administrative data that's available in that state and making it available to other researchers to study such topics as school segregation, teacher quality, charter schools, and early childhood education programs. She's the co-author or co-editor of 12 books, including important studies of the topic of school choice in New Zealand and in South Africa. She was president of the Association for Public Policy and Management in 2011, and since its founding in 2008, she's been co-chair of the National Campaign for a Broader, Bolder Approach to Education. She graduated with a BA from Wellesley College, received a master's degree from the London School of Economics, and earned her PhD in economics right here at Harvard University. Finally, Patrick Wolf is the Distinguished Professor of Education Policy and the 21st Century Endowed Chair in School Choice in the Department for Education Reform at the University of Arkansas's College of Education and Health Professions. He's the Dean of Evaluating School Choice Programs. He served as the principal investigator of the School Choice Demonstration Project, and in that capacity, he's led major studies of school choice initiatives, including those in Washington, D.C., Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and the state of Louisiana. He's authored, co-authored, or co-edited 4 books and over 120 journal articles, book chapters, and policy reports on the topic of school choice, civic values, special education, public management, and campaign finance. He's a graduate of the University of St. Thomas and received his PhD in government from Harvard University. So those are long introductions, but it's to convince you that we have the right people assembled to have this conversation. Without further ado, let me invite them to the stage. So here's how we'll proceed. Each of the panelists will now have 5 minutes to lay out their initial positions on the issue. After that, I'll moderate a discussion among them for 30 minutes or so before we open the floor to you all for your questions and answers. We'll give them just a brief 30 seconds or so at the end to offer some closing advice, and then we'll take another poll and see how the temperature in the room has evolved over the course of the evening. So, Howard, do you want to get us started with your opening remarks?
I will. So good evening. Yes, I believe that school voucher programs for low-income and working-class families as a critical form of parent choice, if well-designed, are a promising strategy to improve outcomes for students who need help the most. But even if the average student outcomes for low-income and working-class children does not improve, I still believe that giving them choice has a value in and of itself. Today in America, far too many children from low-income and working-class families, a disproportionate number of whom are Black and brown, are being miseducated, undereducated, and uneducated. The opportunity gap remains stark and real and persistent. Yet all over this country, there are so many well-meaning individuals who continue to oppose giving these families better options. They continue to agonize over whether or not poor and working class parents should have the power to choose the best learning environments for their children. What makes this agonizing so striking is that many of these same individuals have the resources they need to make the best choices for their children and have no intention of relinquishing that power. Low-income and working-class families cannot, for the most part, attain even a modicum of that power without programs like school vouchers. It is clear that the power to make educational choices is widespread, long-standing, and valued by those who have it. Richard Elmore and Bruce Fuller explained more than a decade ago, choice is everywhere in America. It is manifest in the residential choices made by families and in the housing prices found in neighborhoods, and when families, sometimes at great financial sacrifice, decide to send their children to private schools. In all instances, these choices are strongly shaped by wealth, ethnicity, and social status of parents and their neighborhoods. Stated another way, for those of us who have money, if schools fail to properly educate our children, we have at least three options. We can move to communities where the traditional public schools do work, or we can enroll our children in private schools that work, and or find the most expensive tutoring on the planet. And we don't care what kind of government studies come out, what kind of studies come from Harvard or anywhere else, we're going to take care of our children. The issue of parent choice, for me, is not about free markets and competition. It's about social justice. For those of us who say we care about the plight of poor people in this country, should we not be trying to give them every lever possible to gain control over some aspect of their lives? Since when is it not in the interest of low-income parents and working-class people to have control over the allocation and distribution of money? Since when is it progressive to place the interests of maintaining the status quo above the real needs of people who deserve and need a radical alteration of the power arrangements in order to improve their chances of practicing freedom? Why do we think that choice to low-income and working-class parents will destroy public education? Isn't there a difference between public education and the system that delivers it? Shouldn't low-income and working-class parents have the power to choose which system works best for their children in pursuit of public education? It is very clear that our current systems of education are failing large numbers of our children. Years of new 5-year plans. When I was superintendent, I had one. More funding, smaller class sizes, new curriculums, all of these things have had a minimum impact on the problems facing our poorest children. If our true concerns in this country is our children, why would we continue to force our poorest children to be consigned to schools that do not work for them and probably did not work for their parents? Why should these kids be forced to stay in schools where the teacher who teach them would never put their own children in these same schools? Whose interests are being served by refusing to give these children options for their education? It is certainly not the interest of these children, and in the final analysis, it doesn't serve the interests of this country, because the very foundation of democracy is built on the existence of an educated populace. We cannot continue to have thousands and thousands of young people failing to get the education that they need to be socially and economically productive citizens and think that the United States can continue to be a vibrant democracy. School vouchers is one strategy that will give many of our poorest children a chance to get that education. Given the issues that face our poorest children before they ever get to school, there are no silver bullets out there to help them get a quality education, and that includes school vouchers. But the level of change that is needed will never occur without providing low-income and working-class families the power to choose more and better options for their children's education. I repeat, choice in America and all aspects of American life are widespread unless you are poor. School vouchers as a means to providing choice for these low-income and working-class families is relatively new. But the issue of parent choice is not a new phenomenon in American society. Rather, the real issue has been and continues to be who has it and who doesn't. Thank you.
Wherever you're most comfortable, Cindy. But I'll turn it over to you next.
Okay. Well, it's tough following my friend Howard Fuller. We work together on some things. So I support public school choice. I'm a longtime member of a charter school board, and now its president. However, I am very uncomfortable with vouchers and totally opposed to tax credit scholarships. Though in the end, I could very reluctantly support vouchers if they are limited to students in lower income families, schools' children are fully funded for these families, recipient schools are measured on student performance with results publicly reported, and then they are held accountable for performance quality. I say this because there's no denying that public school choice is growing in popularity among parents and policymakers. But I also believe voucher and tax credit scholarship programs designed the way I proposed are just not likely to happen. Proponents don't want much regulation. I am not much moved by the claims that vouchers and even charter schools will destroy public schools. The vast majority of traditional public schools are not providing the quality of education U.S. students need for successful futures. Most schools serving large proportions of low-income students, students of color, and English language learners are particularly low performing. So part of me says, maybe facetiously, what is there to save? Actually, I believe we need more public school choice and accountability. We have a nationwide problem of underfunding schooling, especially for low-income students. So despite my criticism of the schools that most students attend, I'm very concerned that financial support for traditional and charter public schools will be reduced because of the expansion of vouchers and tax credits. I have allergies, so I'm a little allergic to spring, which is coming to Cambridge, I see. Most advocates for vouchers and tax credit scholarships want deregulation, though I'm not convinced that parents want that. They just want better schools. And recent evaluations of some state voucher programs are not encouraging about quality. There is no question that the public school system, as we've known it, is facing growing challenges. My fear is that its widespread inequity will be mirrored in the new non-public choice options. And worse will be the transition. What about the schools left behind? The biggest problem is the financial albatross of legacy pension costs that is strangling many school systems. Other fixed costs are too. It is wrong to look at American schooling school by school and family by family. For better or worse, we have systems of schools. Yes, systems that need drastic change and redesign, but a piecemeal approach to schooling just for some is wrong and unfair. Public officials have responsibility for all students. There is a solution, but no state is moving in that direction. I believe we should have state-funded schools, all sorts of schools, but equitably funded, that is weighted by student need on a per pupil basis. Even private religious schools could be included if they are held accountable. There no longer would be local funding. We'd be done with property taxes for schools, but there would be local operation. As for politics, I believe vouchers and tax credits will remain a state issue. It is very unlikely, as Marty said, that Congress will enact President Trump's proposals. The tax credit proposal can't pass unless it is part of a bigger tax reduction package enacted through reconciliation, i.e. with a majority vote and no filibuster allowed. I don't believe vouchers can get a majority vote, but probably in either chamber of commerce. So it'll be interesting what the future holds.
Thanks, Cindy. Patrick, we turn it over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Marty. I'm delighted to be back at Harvard, where I obtained my PhD in 1994 with the help of a school voucher called a Pell Grant. I'm especially pleased to be at the Harvard Ed School, where 25 years ago, I met the amazing young woman who is my wife. See what school vouchers can do for you? Just as Kathleen has stuck with me over more than 20 years, my interest in evaluating school voucher programs has persisted, and I'm pleased to share with you today what I have learned. I'm going to use the umbrella term private school choice, or just choice, to refer to any program that encourages or supports parents in choosing a private school for their child. So that would include government-administered school vouchers, tax credit scholarship programs, or the new kid on the block education savings accounts. 28 U.S. states operate 52 different choice programs, and they do so because they are fair, effective, and beneficial to society. Regarding fairness, Howard Fuller eloquently explained that what we are debating today is whether or not poor families should have the same educational options as rich ones. I say yes, in part as a matter of social justice, and in part because private school choice benefits children and society. 4 empirical studies have examined the effects of choice on educational attainment, defined as how far a student goes in school. When it comes to education, how far you go matters more than how much you know. So educational attainment is the best measure of the effectiveness of a choice program. All 4 studies conclude that disadvantaged students attain more education if they have access to school choice. My experimental study of the DC school voucher program performed for the U.S. Department of Education finds that using a voucher increases a student's likelihood of graduating from high school by 21 percentage points. Similar experimental research by Matt Chingos and Paul Peterson of Harvard report that African American students in New York City enroll in college at significantly higher rates if they have access to school choice. 2 studies of Milwaukee's long-running choice program, including one by my research team, find that voucher students graduate from high school, enroll in a 4-year college, and persist into that crucial second year of college at significantly higher rates if they participated in Milwaukee's pioneering parental choice program. The effect of private school choice on student test scores is less clear. As Sunny Ladd stated in her congressional testimony in 2003, the most reliable evidence about this question will come from experimental studies. there have been 17 analyses or reanalyses of randomized experimental data from school choice programs in Charlotte, Dayton, DC, Louisiana, Milwaukee, and New York. 11 of them find statistically significant positive effects of choice on reading or math scores for all participating students or for disadvantaged subgroups of students. 3 report no statistically significant effects of choice, and the remaining 3, one of which I authored, find negative test scores from the Louisiana and DC programs, at least initially. Combining all of these experimental results into a meta-analysis, as my research team has done, indicates that the average effect of private school choice on student test scores is positive in both reading and math, but modest in size and only statistically significant in reading. Effects tend to be null or negative in the first few years as both students and schools adjust to the switch, and then they turn more clearly positive after 3 years. There are even more studies of the effect of private school choice competition on the test scores of non-choosing students, often called the students left behind in affected public schools. Of the 26 statistical studies, 25 report that test scores increase for public school students after private school choice programs are launched or expanded. There have been 68 empirical findings regarding the effect of private school choice on the democratic values of students, including tolerance, political activity, and voluntarism. 41 of them report positive effects of private schooling on civic outcomes. 20 report no difference between public and private schools, and only 3 report negative effects. Studies that I have co-authored have determined that the Milwaukee Parental Choice Program reduces criminal behavior and that the Louisiana program increases the racial integration of public schools. It is no wonder that state legislatures across the country have enacted 52 private school choice programs. School vouchers yield many individual and societal benefits, especially for disadvantaged students, and some of them even score you a Harvard PhD and a spouse.
Thank you, Patrick. Sunny, let me turn it over to you.
Thanks, Marty. I'm delighted to be here. K-12 education provides 2 types of benefits. First, private benefits, such as achievement and educational attainment for the children and also for the families of those children who participate directly in the education system. And second, public or collective benefits, including a stronger democracy, that accrue to the broader community. It is the public benefits of K-12 education that justify making it compulsory and funding it with public taxes. I'm opposed to voucher programs, largely because they privilege private interests with little or no attention to the public interest in education, and also because they undermine the ability of existing state and local education systems, and I use that term system on purpose, to promote the public interest. Secretary DeVos trumpets the benefits of vouchers on the ground that they provide more choice to families. That is, they provide private benefits. Given that families, including many poor families now in urban areas, benefit or have access to choice options through the traditional public school system or voucher programs. We've changed our systems dramatically to offer more choice through the public system. If we move toward vouchers, the main type of additional choice that is being made available is choice over religious schools. So thus the main beneficiaries of private vouchers or of vouchers are the families who value having their children in religious schools. And I don't want to discount that, but I just want to emphasize that. And I want to point out as well that voucher programs can provide this benefit only indirectly because of the constitutional separation of church and state, and that separation may not be possible in all states. Importantly, the evidence of private benefits from vouchers in the form of academic gains are at best limited, and I would argue are more limited than was suggested by Patrick. That reflects the fact that private schools as a group are no more effective than traditional public schools. Moreover, recent careful evidence that vouchers, recent careful studies of vouchers in Louisiana, Indiana, Ohio, and most recently, last weekend in Washington, D.C., show provide new evidence that vouchers do not increase student achievement for the children who are there, and may well reduce it, in some cases, in pretty substantial ways. Now, I acknowledge that some studies do find other private benefits to the participants in the form of higher graduation rates or other forms such as perceptions of safety. But overall, the private benefits of voucher programs are limited. So what would be required for publicly funded private schools to promote the public interest? I reject the argument of some voucher proponents that competition from private schools will promote the public interest by raising the quality of the traditional schools. The competitive effects of this form that emerge in some studies are very small at best, but more importantly, competition would be a very inefficient way to improve the public schools, especially the public schools serving disadvantaged students. The main explanation for the low performance of many students in schools with large concentrations of disadvantaged students is that the children bring a variety of challenges to the school, and we as a society have not done a good enough job in addressing those challenges that impede the learning of students from disadvantaged backgrounds. So I'd like to see more attention in all schools to preschool, or in the system as a whole, to preschool programs, to after-school programs, to mental health counselors in schools, to provide the support that those students need. Vouchers undermine the existing education system by taking funding away from the traditional public schools, by interfering with the planning needed for community-wide plans to assure high-quality options for all children, by increasing segregation, and by not providing protections for civil rights. Now, to promote the public interest, private voucher schools would have to be part of a well-funded system of education designed to meet the needs of all children in an efficient and fair manner. That would require not only that the voucher schools be subject to the public accountability that Cindy was talking about, but also, importantly, that their admissions policies be fully consistent with those of the rest of the system, which might include that they accept children by lottery or be part of a process for admissions. I fear that only the weakest private schools, those schools that are most desperate for public funding, will accept these conditions. Thus, voucher programs should be rejected, both because of the limited private benefits that they're likely to generate, and also the difficulty of promoting and preserving the public interest in education. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunny. So let's thank all of the panelists for their opening remarks. And let's dive into some questions. I think it was interesting that we saw different takes from the different panelists on which considerations should be foremost when we look at the evidence on existing voucher programs. Howard, you suggested that almost regardless of the evidence, the choice has inherent value in and of itself. Patrick, you made the case for paying much more attention to effects of programs on participants' educational attainment than we do on test scores. Sonny, you talked about both of them mattering, but needing to also take into account public benefits in addition to private benefits. And I heard much the same from you, Cindy, and your emphasis on thinking about the system as a whole. Patrick, have you ignored the public role of public education, the public benefits that it provides in your review of the evidence?
No, I don't think I have at all. Basically, what do we want as an outcome from publicly supported education in our country? We want students who are tolerant. We want students who are politically knowledgeable and politically active and are involved in our community. And on all of these metrics, access to private school choice has positive effects on them. So actually the evidence is much stronger that school choice promotes the public interest in education than it is on, as Sonny pointed out, on test scores. It's really a mixed bag. But there's lots of evidence, both qualitative and quantitative, that most private schools seek to educate the whole child and promote these ideas of tolerance and commitment to communal goals. And in many cases where careful analysis has been done, they do it more effectively than government-run schools.
Sonny, how would you respond to that?
So I think that misses a large part of the point of the public interest. I emphasized the word system of education throughout, as did Cindy. We need to model what it is that we're trying to do through our education system. And what we're trying to do is provide a high-quality education to all children. And that's complicated to do, and it's costly to do, and it's especially costly to do if we have no idea how many children are going to be in the public school system at any particular time because they're going off and being funded through vouchers or other things. So I would come back to emphasizing that we ought to be focusing on the system and making sure that the system works for all children, including the children that Howard is so concerned about. I too am concerned about those. I just think that the way to improve or promote the public interest is to make sure those kids are part of a larger system that works well for all disadvantaged children, not just the ones who are going to take advantage of a voucher program.
Howard, you actually spoke explicitly about wanting to distinguish between concern for the system and concern for public education writ large. Yet Cindy and Sonny are arguing, I think, that a lack of concern for the system will really have adverse consequences for its ability to deliver quality education, quality opportunities to students who are disadvantaged currently. How do you see it?
I find this a torturous discussion now. And let me explain why. First of all, I agree with all of what Cindy just said. So Cindy's conditions for why she would support vouchers, I'm with all of those. And so, because I agree, there ought to be accountability. I do not think that private schools that participate in a voucher program should have admissions criteria. I think we ought to have equitable funding. I'm for all of those things. Okay, so let me just put that out front, and then we can talk about it. But I found that, Sonny's description of kids who would graduate from high school at a private school, that's a private benefit. To me, that's a public benefit for this reason. If kids graduate, let me put it another way, if kids don't graduate from high school, in many cases, there is another public institution waiting for them, and it's called prison. And so that if somehow you can get kids to graduate from a private school, that's a huge public benefit, because their chances of not going to prison, not being on welfare, how is that not a public benefit? And so for me, the real issue here, and I see Howard Gardner back there, and I don't want to get into multiple intelligence and stuff, but which I totally admire. I admire him a lot, so I just had to get that in. It's got nothing to do with what I'm talking about. Tyak just died, a few months ago, right? Mm-hmm. His whole book was on the struggle to find the one best system. There is no one best system in America for education. And to keep talking about these systems, if there's something precious, if they're so precious, why did all of y'all with money leave? When people start talking about things like integration, oh my God, these choice programs are going to hurt integration. You know what hurt integration is when white people left the city. And so to me, to put all of these issues on choice, it's a false premise. And so the issue still for me is clear. I do not think that there's any program that can ever be brought into being that doesn't have a negative consequence. Every public policy that I've ever seen has a positive and a negative consequence. And that what you're forced to do at the moment in history in which you live is to determine whether or not the positives outweigh the negatives. And for me, giving low income and working class people some modicum of power is a positive.
Cindy, does your concern for the impact on the system sort of privilege a ineffective status quo?
My concerns are a little different than Sonny's. And, I live in Washington, D.C., where I've lived for 50 years. And about half the kids are in charter schools, and the other half are in traditional public schools, and then another percent, somehow, I don't have the percentages right, but are in the DC voucher program. So in DC, people have a lot of choice, and I'm happy with that. What I'm unhappy about, I feel like I've been struggling with this stuff my entire career, and I see the way we organize school systems. We draw boundaries by wealth oftentimes, or people make, and rely on property taxes where there are great differences in property wealth. And you can support schools at a greater level when you got a lot of wealthy property. We see low property wealth communities, particularly in some states like New Jersey, where they pay high tax rates, which is a real struggle for lower income and working class people, but they can't buy much with what they get from that tax. And so you have very low quality schooling. You can't, in most places, teachers are underpaid, but I bet they aren't in Newton or in Scarsdale. And it's, the inequity in the system is awful. That's why I want to break up the system. I am not interested in defending the system we have. And, but as I said in my remarks, I don't think solving the problem for some folks who have the initiative to choose schools, and a lot of them are, unlike a lot of liberals, I don't have a big problem with kids going to religious schools if they're held accountable. And I believe that I believe that religion can play a really important part in the lives of families with deep struggles. So I'm not so hostile to that, but I am concerned with, we underfund public education in this country, and we're going to, and I just believe these the voucher and certainly the tax credit, taking more money out of our tax system we are already undertaxed, I find ridiculous, and that it's just going to lower the quality of the schools that continue in the more traditional vein. So I don't know. I've written about this stuff. I have ideas about how you can turn the system upside down. But I find virtually no interest among elected officials to even start down that road.
So just one point. I think we do agree on a lot. I mean, we all want, or at least I'm not sure I want to.
We'll come back to that.
I don't want I don't want to put words into Patrick's mouth, but I think, as Howard said, he's all for accountability,
yep.
and Cindy's all for accountability, and I said I'm all for accountability because we're spending public funding. What we learned from Louisiana is that largely because of the accountability requirements that were put into the system, the private schools that were willing to participate were really low quality private schools. So if your goal, Howard, is to help disadvantaged kids, it's not at all clear to me how making this promise, opening up choice to very low quality private schools addresses your need.
Yeah, but I think the Archdiocese of New Orleans would be very, I think it's a shock to them to learn that they have now been characterized by you as low-performing schools. And I think that that's unfair to those schools. I've spent a considerable amount of my life over the last 2 to 3 years in Louisiana fighting on that scholarship program. And I can tell you that a significant number of low-income children are better off today because of that program than they were before. But having said that, the thing that just continues to it's hard for me to understand. When people start talking about things like tax credits, as Cindy did, and I understand what she's saying about, taking money out of the tax code. The amount of money that a low-income, a tax credit for low-income families would take out of the tax code is zip compared to what they're talking about doing for rich people.
Well,
and so, to me, what happens is we pick a program that could help poor kids and start talking about, oh my God, it's going to do this and that. In the meantime, rich people in this country are just getting off like bandits. But yet, we sit in a room like this and agonize over giving some poor people an opportunity. How does that work? How do we do that in America? We should all be trying to talk about not having rich folks who are, I do not support universal vouchers. I never have, and I never will. I did not get in this fight because to me, Chris Rock is the dude I listen to. That tells you the level I'm working at. And so that Chris Rock would say that, look, if you got money in America, you like right here. If you don't got money, you like right here. I did not get in this to do this. I got in it to do this. And that's a fundamental difference in terms of how I see this fight.
So I want to dig in a little bit on this question of regulations, because as Sunny pointed out, we actually started to hear something of a consensus among the panelists, which was that if there's going to be funding flowing to private schools, that there should be a set of regulations concerning admissions, accountability for test-based outcomes, I assume, as well as some protections for civil rights. And to some extent, Cindy in particular, you seemed open to what sounded to me like actually a universal voucher program by which
low income.
Well, you said a state-funded program where there would be school choice, and it would include religious schools, and there would be a weighted student funding formula, which gives, yes, a preference for low-income students.
Right. Yeah. Yes, that's true. But my ideal system that I want to address the crazy inequities we have now, I don't see any steps for getting there.
That's what I was starting to zero in on, which it seems like we have different takes on the political feasibility of getting to the types of regulations that you would like to see in the context of a system that would provide funding for private schools. So, Patrick, is it right that private schools receiving public funds should be regulated in the ways that your fellow panelists have suggested? And how likely is that we would get there And would private schools even be supportive of the concept of public funding if those regulations were attached?
I'm afraid I'm going to be the skunk at the regulation garden party here.
Right.
I am very concerned about the idea of foisting the entire elaborate regulatory scheme that we've devised for traditional public schools, that we devised in the absence of school choice. I mean, the most robust accountability comes from consumer choice and the pressure that that produces for organizations to deliver for their clients or lose them. And so in public schools, when public schooling was compulsory and there was little to no choice, we had to develop a performance-based system of accountability because that was the only accountability available. Under a choice regime, we have the much more robust accountability of customer choice. And I would just be very concerned that if we mandate the state test for private schools, if we even take a step beyond that and mandate the state curriculum for private schools, that we will simply transform private schools into the public schools that families are trying to flee. And it will lead to a non-robust set of choices for parents. I think parental choice works best when parents have lots of options, lots of information, and so I think that schools, private schools participating in choice should be required to administer a norm reference test, report those results to parents so they can make informed choices. But I don't think it needs to be the state test, and I certainly don't think that they should be regulated in all the ways that public schools are regulated.
But there are not state curriculum. We don't have state curriculum.
Sure, there are state curriculum.
We may have
We don't have
standards.
national common core, but that's because we have state curriculum that are set by.
Here we're in the famous Common Core debate between standards and curriculum, and when does a standard become a curriculum?
Well, I'm not for regulating curriculum.
Yeah.
So, Patrick, what would you do about transportation costs? And Howard as well. So
I can tell you what I would do.
Yeah.
I would pay for it.
Sure.
I mean, that's not a hard question. So,
Make that part of the voucher like it is here in DC. It's part of the voucher in DC.
Let me say where Patrick and I might have a disagreement. Here's my thing. It's like, once you take public money, okay, I believe and I've evolved with this, right? I believe the public has a right to know what has actually happened, with that public investment. And so I believe that there's a compromise between the kind of rigid accountability mechanisms that cut off autonomy and no quote accountability, right? And so for me the question is, where is that happy medium that allows people to have some level of autonomy, but at the same time gives the public information about what is actually happening with the public dollars that are being invested. And the reason why I like to talk about parent choice as opposed to school choice is because I didn't get in it to give schools choice. I got in it to give parents choice. And what the schools have is a choice of getting into a program that gives parents choices. And with those choices may come some things that you have to do differently. If you're unwilling to do those things, then you should not get into the program. So, and I really think that there is a way to do this that prevents what Patrick is talking about, but at the same time gives people real information about what it is that's happening to kids by virtue of the investment.
So I'm a political scientist by training, and so I want to think a little bit about how the presence of a substantial private school choice program, even one sort of that's means tested for low-income families, would change the politics of education, especially insofar as it is related to school funding. So I hear a lot of concern from Cindy and Sunny about the extent to which the presence of private school choice programs could undermine financial support for public education. Howard, are you concerned about that?
Look, when I was superintendent, man, this is why this is hard for me. When I was superintendent, nobody was protesting the fact that Mequon was getting $17,000 per kid and we was getting $8,000.
Right.
So to me, again, it's problematic for me in terms of how all of a sudden people zero in on a private school choice program as being the thing that's going to cause all of this inequity. And a lot of the people who are hollering about the inequity moved out of the city to the suburbs so that they could have really good schools for their children and then write papers on why poor parents should stay in the city. So I'm just saying that at some point that hypocrisy has to be called, whether people like it or not. And so what I'm saying is I believe that we should have equitable funding, not equitable, adequate funding, because equitable funding is not adequate. When you begin to talk about what is it that is happening to poor children in urban areas or rural areas, for that matter, right? So that what I'm for is for students having adequate funding in order to meet the needs that they have. That's what I'm for.
Yeah, and I think that's good. But what do you do in Chicago where the whole system is teetering on, having to close down because of the pension costs and because the state of Illinois is totally unfair to Chicago? But so my problem with, I don't have a big quarrel with Howard's framing of the issue for low-income families, but I think he doesn't get into the consequences of what happens in particularly large city districts that are already in big trouble.
But Cindy, I was the superintendent for one of them. Okay? And so the choice program did not cause legacy costs. But we can't keep saying, I know, but then you keep blaming it for doing that.
Well, that's why I'm not a flag waving opponent of vouchers and choice, because I agree that it's just that I don't see how it helps.
But Cindy, here's what I'm saying. I understand your concern. But for people who don't understand the issue, if we bring up the issue that you raised within the context of a discussion about private school choice, people will leave here thinking that somehow private school choice had this major impact on the legacy costs that exist in traditional public school systems. No. What happened were contracts that were negotiated by elected and appointed school boards. What happened were state legislatures making decisions about where they were going to put money, and it wasn't into urban areas. So what I'm saying is, let's start talking about who the real culprits are for the types of problems that you're raising, and it is not private school choice.
So in just a moment, I want to open it up to the audience to ask questions so you can begin to get your wheels turning a bit. But before we do, I want to bring up one word that only came up once, Sonny, and it came up in your remarks, which was the word religion. It seems to me that the fundamental difference between the type of public school choice programs that, Cindy, you talked favorably about, and private school choice programs, and this is a quirk of really the way in which the church and state separation issues have been litigated in the U.S., is that private school choice programs can include religious schools while public school choice programs can't. We can, in theory, regulate a private school choice program to pretty much look exactly like the type of programs that you spoke favorably about. So, is the opportunity to attend a religious school, how should that inform our thinking about the voucher debate? Sonny, do you want to speak to that first?
Briefly, I think the issue of religious schools is a complicated one. I think we ought to have a public debate about that. Is it time to change the Blaine amendments that are in many state constitutions that say you cannot give state funding for religious schools? I don't know exactly where I'd come out on it, but I don't like funding the religious schools indirectly through ways designed to get around the US Constitution and the state constitution. So I'd much rather have us have a debate, and it's a complicated debate, because I suspect lots of us would say, oh, well, some religious schools would be fine. How about other religious schools? Do we really want the government to be in a position of saying, this religion is okay, we're gonna fund that school, but this religion over here, no, that's not good for our democratic values? It's a complicated question.
Patrick, how does the issue of religion inform your thinking about this issue, and how do you deal with the issue that Sunny just raised about where you draw the line?
Well, we're talking about parental choice, and parents have preferences about the kind of school they want their child to attend. Most parents participating in private school choice programs prefer that their child go to a religious school. Not necessarily to match their own religious affiliation. I mean, we have many cases of Baptist parents sending their kids to Catholic schools, and Catholic school parents sending their kids to evangelical Protestant schools. They tend to say that they just want religion to be part of the educational environment of their child. It's less important that it be their specific religious affiliation. But for only about 1 in 4 parents participating in choice is a religious environment the number one feature they're looking for in a school. For 6 in 10, they say it's the academic program of the school, or teacher quality, basically a characteristic that's associated with the academic profile of the school. And for 1 in 5, it's safety. And there's a strong connection between religious schools and safety. They're considered more safe because they put a strong emphasis on order and discipline, and families really like that. So there are 2 private school choice programs that prohibit the participation of religious schools in America. They're in Vermont and Maine. They started in 1869, and they included religious schools for many decades, and then excluded them in the 20th century. And I'm not supportive of those kinds of programs, because I think we should leave it to parents to decide if a religious environment is the best educational environment for their child. They should have those choices.
So let's open it up to the room. Please make your way to the microphones on either aisle. If you have a question, please be sure to identify yourself and make sure that your statement ends with a question mark. Yes, sir.
So I had a question about, we've heard a lot of different things about how vouchers would be used to give more choice to students, and how I think the gentleman on the end was saying that there shouldn't be admission requirements for these schools that the children are going to. So I'm just curious, what's the logical conclusion of that? Because it seems like at some point these schools can't accept any more students, and what happens when there are more students that want to attend a school than can, and what happens to those students that are now left in a school that has fewer students and even fewer resources? So how does this end? Is it a stopgap measure, or is it something that's viable long term?
Okay, well, that's a great question. In most private school choice programs, the private schools have to accept all students who apply and who seek admission to the school. If that would make their school oversubscribed, they hold a lottery to admit students. It's true in Milwaukee, it's true in DC, it's true in Louisiana, it's true in most of the choice programs. In some of them, basically, they're admitted on a first come, first serve basis until they're full. What does that do for traditional public schools? Well, traditional public schools experience student mobility regularly on an annual basis, especially inner city public schools face student mobility of 25-30%, where students just don't come back for various reasons. So choice-induced student mobility is going to be a small component of that. And as we see from the research, yes, resources then leave the school after the student has gone, but test scores go up for the students left behind, and that could be for a number of reasons. One reason is that basically the students who didn't want to be there are gone, and a lot of educators will tell you it's a lot easier to teach kids when they all want to be there. A second reason is that they can really focus more on the set of students that they have and concentrate on them. It can lead to smaller class sizes in the short term. You know, we don't know the exact mechanism, but we just know study after study shows that student test scores in public schools go up in the face of private school choice competition. And as Sunny mentioned, and I admitted, the increases are small, but they're increases. So this claim that school choice in 25 out of 26. So this idea that private school choice is going to throw public schools into a death spiral has been completely refuted by the research evidence.
Has it been refuted?
So the evidence in the US is complicated. New Zealand doesn't have a full voucher program, but boy, there are some lessons from the New Zealand experience, which I've spent a lot of time looking at. The New Zealand policymakers thought, we've got all these disadvantaged schools serving large concentrations of disadvantaged students. Let's just give parents choice, give schools incentives to get better, and let's give them some autonomy, and they will get better. Did they get better? No. They ended up as downward spiraling schools. The more motivated students left. Those schools serving disadvantaged kids, good for them. They chose other schools. But then the disadvantaged schools got less funding. Teachers left. Then more students left. They were downwardly spiraling. This didn't solve their problems.
But that was a public school choice program, Sonny. There were no private schools participating in that.
There were no private schools because the private schools were already incorporated into the public school system.
Yes, sir.
Just a quick question. My understanding is most vouchers are worth a few $1,000s per student, and there are some private schools that run in the several tens of thousands of dollars. So how big does a voucher have to be in order to provide basically the same choice as a wealthy family would have, and what implication does that have on the design of voucher programs?
Howard, this is something you all have wrestled with in Milwaukee and in your national advocacy.
Yeah, well, first of all, I don't think that the voucher, I think the mistake that we made back in 1989 was to buy this notion that you can educate poor kids on the cheap. And the reality of it is that's wrong. And that poor kids need more money, not less money. And so the problem that we have here is, and this is just sort of how I see this, is that those of us who care about poor children ought to be fighting for both choice and adequate funding. But we need to be fighting that fight for children in all three sectors, not just in one of these sectors. Because I'm a three-sector person. I believe in traditional public schools, I believe in charter schools, I believe in private schools. I also believe in homeschool. I believe in anything that gives parents power to have a better learning environment for their children. So I want to stand with people who are demanding that schools be funded. But the problem is that we turn on each other instead of the billions of dollars that's getting ready to go into the Defense Department and all of these other places where money is going, instead of the money that is going for the education of our children. And I think it's a huge mistake for those of us who actually care about kids to be pointed at each other as if we're the problem, instead of the decisions that people are making to put money elsewhere.
In Milwaukee, the voucher is how much?
It's, okay, I think it's like $7,800 or something like that. Now, the problem is in Milwaukee is that if you're a low-income family, and this is a truth, that you have families that send their kids to MPS, send their kids to a private school, and send their kids to a charter school. If you go to MPS, Milwaukee Public Schools, you generate, I think, almost $14,000 per kid. Our charter school that I'm on the board of generates 83 or something like that. The voucher now generates around 78 or something close to it. So what I'm saying is, it's incomprehensible to me that 3 children can leave the same house on a given day, and because that parent or parents have made these choices, they generate 3 different amounts of money. That's wrong.
Yes, sir.
Hey, my name is Tony Emerson. I'm a student here. 2 quick questions. The first one is, there's been no discussion of validity of the research that's been done. I'm wondering if there's any thoughts to some of the biases that might be extant in the research. But the more interesting question for me, and particularly for Mr. Wolf, given, to build off of what Dr. Fuller said earlier, given that much of inequity was caused by white middle-class people's unwillingness to stay proximate to poor black and brown children, why is it that private schools that mostly serve white middle-class kids in white middle-class communities would be authentically interested in educating black and brown children?
So should we talk first about the validity of the research and then turn to that question?
Sure. Well, experimental methods discipline the researcher and remove a lot of choices that might be driven by ideology or bias. I mean, basically, you take the students who applied for a choice program, that program's oversubscribed, so they hold a lottery, and you get 2 groups of students who all wanted to participate in choice. One group that won the lottery and another group that lost the lottery. The group that lost the lottery becomes the control group. They're the perfect counterfactual to compare with the scholarship-winning voucher group, because they represent what would have happened to the voucher kids if they hadn't won the lottery. So that's why Sonny is on record supporting the experimental method for evaluating school choice programs.
Which is what you emphasize in your meta-analysis.
Exactly.
And Sonny, do you agree with that characterization? We do often refer to it as the gold standard.
So he's talking about studies that are able to answer one question and one question only, or one type of question. Do the students who participate in the voucher programs achieve, or whatever measure you're using, at higher levels than they would if they had stayed in the traditional public school system? I would argue that there are many other broader questions that we need to ask about vouchers. And so those studies are able to answer that one narrow question, but they can answer the broader question well about what's the impact on the public school system. I know there are some studies that look at that, but they're not all that gold standard type.
And it's hard to know what would happen at scale when we haven't done something at scale.
And you don't know what's going to happen at scale. But those are the issues that policymakers ought to be talking about. What would happen if you take this at scale? Can I add one thing? This relates to your political question earlier. Howard Fuller has been saying he wants a voucher program that's targeted to disadvantaged kids. The politics of all of this is, in my view, that if you start with a targeted program, it's a slippery slope, and the politics are going to lead you in the direction of a full
That's what
universal
Indiana's
program.
doing.
And that's happened in Indiana is a prime example, the home state of Vice President Pence. That's exactly what happened there, and you can see it happening in other places.
Was there a second question you asked?
Yeah, there was
a good second question. So Patrick, I want you to speak to that, but Howard, I'd like you to speak to it as well.
So, but first on the validity of the competitive effects studies that Sonny mentioned. Yes, you can't randomly assign communities to experience school choice or not, but there are valid social science methods that you can use to identify the effect that private school choice itself is having on the achievement of students in public schools. And there's a long list of very reputable social scientists who have contributed to this literature, including Marty West, David Figlio, Raj Chakrabarty, Caroline Hawksby. It's a long and diverse group of researchers who have all looked at this question and found that, if anything, the competitive effects on existing public school students are positive.
Some studies show negative effects.
I want to address your question, and I also want to talk about this slippery slope analysis, right? Because could I make an argument that integration put us on a slippery slope? Because as we push for integration, what happened? White people with money and black people with money left the city. And so was that a slippery slope, or was that a fight for justice. And sometimes when you fight for justice, what we know about our society is those people with resources are going to use those resources to benefit their own children, no matter what your social justice goals are. So that a voucher program, any other program, if your goal, and mine is social justice, then what you know is you're always going to be fighting a slippery slope, because America is not fundamentally a just society. And so I get your concerns, but my concerns along those lines run the gamut and not just about parent choice. But the issue that you raised, I want you to come to Milwaukee now, so you can see the proximate. I know y'all use that, your generation used that term. So here's like the proximate relationship between poor black kids and the poor children that we started this program for. See, the advantage is I was there in 1988 with Polly Williams when we fought for this voucher program. And I had never read Milton Friedman. I didn't even know nothing, man, about capitalism and freedom. We fought for a voucher program because the Milwaukee public schools system consistently refused to educate poor black children. And they wouldn't let us create our own district, so we said, let us out of here. So that initially our goal was to give black people the opportunity to create schools that we could control. When the program got expanded in 1995 and ultimately got approved or was ruled constitutional in 1998, is when religious schools got involved. But if you come to Milwaukee and you go to a St. Marcus or you go to Hope Lutheran or you go to any number of other schools, and if you go on the south side and you go to those schools that are serving poor brown children, you will see that there are people who actually want to educate those kids. But the truth of the matter is that there are private schools and there's private schools, right? And so the type of private schools that I think you are talking about, they ain't in Milwaukee, man. They out in the suburbs. And there's a small number of kids who are able to access those schools because those parents don't have the resources that Obama, who I loved, used to access Sidwell Friends. So on the one hand, you can't talk about denying access to the poorest kids, and then you put your own kids in the best private schools that you can find. And and this is the last point I'm gonna make, because I do want to invite you to come now, and we're gonna walk around, seriously. So one of the Catholic schools that was the last school to participate in the Milwaukee Parental Choice Program was a Catholic school on the far northwest side. And you know why they were reluctant to get into the program? Because the vast majority of the kids who were in that school came from teachers from the Milwaukee public schools who did not want poor black kids to access their school.
Professor Glenn.
Hi, I'm Charles Glenn. I actually want to address the religion issue, which Helen Ladd, who I debated with a couple of years ago, as I recall, raised, indicating that really will be the issue. You know, it's not the nuts and bolts of voucher programs. We're going to have a major issue as this thing evolves about the question of what kind of religious institutions are eligible to participate. And, you know, it may well be the Supreme Court and the Trinity Lutheran decision soon will in effect do away with the Blaine Amendments. Or perhaps in the Denver, the Colorado case. But first, let me respond a little bit to Howard Fuller. I was in charge of desegregation of the Massachusetts schools in the 1970s and 80s. In fact, I wrote the Boston desegregation plan. All 7 of my own children went to the Boston public schools. Right? As a matter of honor, I did not remove them. We put endless money into the Boston schools, and we ordered parents to send their children to different schools in order to achieve racially integrated schools. It did not work. So When we then worked with Cambridge and Holyoke and Springfield, Lawrence, Lowell, Lynn, New Bedford, Fall River, we used parent choice. Listening to what parents wanted for their children in the schools, we were able to create desegregation plans with no conflict, with the schools getting better, and with much more engagement on the part of families in the education of their children. However, that was only among public schools. Then, of course, we got the charter school. They are public schools, but that enabled more schools. In Boston, we have, I think, the best charter schools in the country. Wonderful portfolio of schools. However, that does not go far enough because so many parents do want schools that reflect their own religious convictions. Now, Cindy mentioned the possibility that we might have government making decisions that this kind of religious group can operate schools and that kind can't. And of course, the underlying message of that, I suspect, I don't think you intend this, but the underlying message would be that schools which are Islamic would not be allowed because they would somehow be dangerous schools. As Patrick knows, I've just completed a study of 7 Islamic high schools across the country looking at how they set out to develop citizens. And we found they're doing an outstanding job of convincing their students to fully buy into American civic life. And in fact, I was 2 weeks ago at the annual Islamic schools meeting in Chicago, the annual convention, with hundreds and hundreds of Islamic educators overwhelmingly talking about how they saw themselves as having an important mission to help to make American society truly a just and fair society. So I'm not worried about that. I agree, Helen, we do need to have the debate, though, and I suspect that whatever the Supreme Court does in the Trinity Lutheran decision, we will be having that debate soon.
So I didn't hear a question mark at the end of that one, and that's okay. But we've come to the end. We unfortunately have come to the end of our time, and the one thing we do need to do in these events is be respectful of people's time. I did tell our panelists that they would each have 30 seconds at the end of the evening in which to offer their briefing that they would give to Secretary DeVos about her interest in private school choice if they, for example, were caught in an elevator with her in a tall building. They have her ear for 30 seconds. What do they say? So, Sonny, I'll start with you.
This is a question. So according to the U.S. Constitution, education is a state responsibility, not a federal responsibility. And most states have in their constitutions wording of the following type: the state shall provide a thorough and efficient system of education, or the wording might be a general and uniform system. So I would want to ask Secretary DeVos, why is it appropriate for the Federal Department of Education to pursue a policy that is specifically designed to disrupt these systems?
Patrick.
I would have very different advice for Secretary DeVos, as you might expect. I would encourage her, to the extent possible, to enact federal laws that tie educational resources to children, that fund children instead of systems. Because I don't see an educational system as having any inherent value. Its only value is in the outcomes it promotes for the students who experience it. So that's why I focus on student outcomes. And I think that, to the extent possible, the resources that we make available for public education in our country should be as directly as possible connected to the students that they're supposed to be supporting. Cindy?
So I would ask her, Madam Secretary, do you support any kind of regulation of voucher and tax credit scholarship programs to ensure quality? And secondly, do you believe these programs should be need-based?
With implicit answers to those questions, I take it.
From her.
Answers you're hoping to hear. That's right.
But I don't expect them.
Howard.
I would say, Betsy, look, do what you can from your bully pulpit to support giving low-income and working-class parents options, but do not take money from places like Title I to support any type of federal program, because what you should be doing is standing as strong as you can, given who you work for, to make sure that all children in this country get what they need so that they can get the type of education they need to engage in what Paulo Freire called the practice of freedom.
Well, we've reached the end of the evening. I said that these Askwith debates were created both to address specific controversies, but also to model the way in which civil disagreement can promote deeper understanding. And with that latter goal in particular, I think I want to thank my panelists for modeling that for us tonight. So in that sense, we're all winners, but I also want to know who won. So if we could bring up the poll one more time. I think heading in, it was something like 65 to 16 opposed. See where things have ended up. Don't trust the early returns. This is like,
This is like Wisconsin.
So this is Florida?
It does look like there's been a change in the center of gravity. Well, Howard and Patrick, you didn't quite get to a majority, it appears.
I just want to get out alive.
Congrats. Hey.
I had a low threshold.
As I said, we're all winners. Again, please join me in thanking the panelists for an outstanding discussion. Thank you all, and we hope to see some of you back here next Tuesday at the last Askwith Forum of the year. That was fun.